with an internal rate of return of 15%. In the case of district heating networks in the future, designed and potentially developable with an internal rate of return minor, than 15%, they sort of not consider them fully feasible. So there's something going on here. And let's not forget the prices. Usually this calculation has been made considering that the generation cost of heat is about 82 euros, when the system is basically based on natural gas. And the final user's price for it, basically what I pay with my heating bill, is about 95 euros, which is a number that in Italy you hear a lot. When you speak about district heating, it's something about around 100. You can have some variation, but it's a good number. When we speak about district heating with based on biomass, these numbers change a little bit, and the calculation behind this potential speak about 104 euros per megawatt hour for systems that generate heat starting from biomass, with a final user's price of 140 euros per megawatt hour. And always take into consideration that this calculation with biomass has been made with a rough estimate of the cost of wood chips around 20 euros per megawatt hour. Why I'm saying these things? First of all, because you have to understand this in Italy, when we speak about biomass heating system, the district heating system, usually refer to areas in which we don't have the natural gas grid. There are some cases, of course, in which they are located in the area where there is the so-called methanization, but usually we refer to mountain areas, we have mountains as well, in which you don't have the natural gas grid. So somehow this cost may tell this story as well. For what is related to the cost of, to the price, sorry, of wood chip, 20 euros per megawatt hour, this estimate that is behind this calculation, I have to say, and we'll talk a little bit about this later in the Lithuanian case, this is a bit of a problem in Italy, because we don't have agencies that monitor this price. Basically, there's only in Italy the Chamber of Commerce of Milan, who's trying to keep a little bit of monitoring or biomass prices, but it's quite tricky. It's not widespread. I tried myself to establish a sort of platform in the Chamber of Commerce of Turin. I created the committees, but nobody ever showed up. So we don't have the time to, maybe I was not very nice, I don't know, but we don't have the time now to go through this, but it's complicated. And Lithuania found a solution on this, and that's why I wanted to do the presentation together. The current framework is of incentive for the district heating is quite complex. I mean, lots of very large systems in Italy have benefited in the past from many different incentives, including green certificates, when the cogeneration was associated with district heating. But now these things don't work anymore. We had the, some tools related to the energy efficiency markets with the white certificates, but in this moment, this kind of incentive is substantially blocked for some technical reasons related to the energy efficiency coefficient comprises, that is basically in this kind of incentive mechanisms. So it's almost not usable. And then there's a nice story that links me a little bit to my friend Isa, because in 2011, when Italy received the directive for renewable energy sources, it was constituted a national fund as a guarantee fund to promote the networks of district heating, and specifically the networks of district heating, taken from the pocket of every single household consumer, something like 5 euro cent per standard cubic meter of natural gas distributed. Well, if you do the math, it's not little money, because after 3 years, it was more like 100 million of euros accumulated in Italy for this sort of guarantee fund. Guess what? Not even €1 is being used as a guarantee fund for district heating networks. Actually, not even €1 is being used at all, because after a little bit less than 1 year, this amount of money was reassigned to smart buildings for public administration, and then there was a little bit of rethinking, and it was reassigned to a national fund for energy efficiency, where district heating is only a part of it. And the end of the story is that we're still waiting for some, decrease that will a little bit say something about how to use this money. Then other systems in place are a special VAT for fossil fuels that serve a distributed network with cogeneration, so there's a little bit of a tax break on VAT. We had lower excises for natural gas that are basically that is basically used for boilers, backup boilers. So there's a little bit of money coming from this. And then we have a tax reduction to benefit final user on biomass district heating systems. This is quite interesting. I mean, if you're a company and you are basically providing heat with a biomass district heating service, you can sort of give some money back to the final users because of this tax reduction. To be fairly honest, I don't know if it has been thoroughly evaluated and monitored, this amount of money, because when I've spoken with consumers belonging to these networks, I don't know, there should be a little bit better enforcement on this kind of incentives, but this is in place. So, it's all okay, you know, everything is fine, the debt is growing, we got incentive in place. No, it's not okay, not really. In 2011, the Italian Antitrust Authority started an investigation on district heating because there were many complaints coming to the Competition Authority from final users about heat prices. You know, initially, district heating is not regulated at all. Basically, municipalities or private companies win a concession, there's an agreement with the municipality, and they go on with the service. They do the network, and they, you know, provide the service. There's no regulation at all. So prices went a little bit funny. People were not happy because their aunties and grandmas were paying less money for the same service, maybe just because they were living 2 blocks away. And this created some pressure on the Competition Authority. The switching cost and the connection has always been a problem, as everybody knows in this room, because of the technology itself. Some users wanted to understand a little bit better the tendering procedures of municipalities for district heating services. We don't have the time to go into this matter, but it's quite a complicated matter, because if district heating is considered a service of general interest, everything will be a lot easier for municipalities to go into this direction. But there was no formal definition of local public services of district heating in Italy. We had some results from some tribunals, but the results were quite weak, so people wanted to understand a little bit better what was going on. And then, of course, the lack of transparency for tariffs and tariffs updates. What do I mean by this? Because there's no regulation at all, some users were starting to wonder why the natural gas price goes down and my heating system doesn't go down in price. And so, in some cases in Italy, there have been bad cases, frauds and things like this, that have been prosecuted because of this reason. And this did not help district heating to be the good guy that it should be for air quality, energy efficiency, and things like this. Utilities today are facing difficulties because they are not really facing the paradigm shift that they need to have. Maybe we'll talk about this during the roundtable with our friend David from Aalborg University, but I mean, in the next years, the price of electricity will go down a lot. So basically, we need to change the business model, and they are not doing it. And sometimes, in these dear financial conditions, they don't want to face the risks of district heating network expansions, because the risks are a little bit higher. It's difficult today to forecast expansions, and so basically, the idea is to wait. The point is that when we speak about district heating, a little bit everywhere, but in Italy in particular, you face 2 situations. One is the situation that is related to older networks, very large older networks. When I speak large networks, I speak for cities like Turin, Milan, and things like this. These networks are very old. The network has been amortized. And honestly, the generation price of heat, it can be 5 or 6 times lower than the tariff. So these systems work well for utilities. And if you look just at this kind of systems, you will think that district heating is a fantastic cow that has to be milked every day. But then, if you have a look at middle-sized systems, and especially greenfield situation, in which you have to start everything from the beginning, lots of utilities are not starting to do anything, because the payback time is 30, 20 years, and sometimes this happens in some cities I know. I won't mention names of utilities and cities because it's not elegant, but just last week I knew that there was a case in which there was a request for making a concession for 45 years. This is quite complicated. It's quite complicated. And of course, another problem is the third-party access to thermal grids. This is something economists like a lot. We've seen it in other network industries. in Italy is not happening very much apart from industrial sector. I mean, just last week there was incredible, very interesting news. One of the oldest district heating systems in Italy, in the city of Brescia, which is an historical industrial city with iron, electricity with iron, managed to create a third-party access with heat recovery from an industry. You know, iron needs a lot of heat, it gets wasted, so it was a nice case. But we don't have a lot of them, like I showed you with the numbers before of district heating heat recovery. And then there's no system to monitor solid biomass prices. So when we speak about the supply cost, we might face some surprises. The last problem that we are facing in Italy, and I mentioned at the very beginning of this morning, is the stakeholder analysis. I mean, district heating is a particularly complicated sector because there are lots of stakeholders involved. Because of the competing options for space heating, because of the municipality interest, because of the utilities, because of all the subjects. We don't have to mention, or we don't have to forget as well, the facility managers and the people who provide heat contracts, not with district heating, but just natural gas networks. There's a lot of people involved. This very strange slide, it represents a workshop that we did in my organization, closed doors, so it was not open to the public. We invited all the people, all the actors actually, all the stakeholders interested in analyzing the district heating system in our city. And the problem was related to the third-party access of an industrial plant that could have given heat to the network. After 3 years of the construction of this industrial plant, nothing happened. So we thought, well, let's try to apply a little bit of stakeholder analysis to this situation. We spoke 3 hours. It was very, very tiring. We analyzed all the information that every stakeholder had, all the relationship between all the stakeholders, who was appointed by whom, what was the flow of information between stakeholders. Again, everybody was quite happy. But I have to say that it failed because nothing happened. Still today, after years and years and years, we don't have that kind of heat recovery in the network of Turin. Why? Because of all the incentives. The industrial facility was benefiting from green certificates related to the green electricity production. And the project finance behind it, of course, the banks behind it, basically they didn't want to go into that direction because they were not willing to face risks of having less finance from electricity production, because it was a particular industrial plant in which if you want to increase the heat, you have to decrease the electricity production. And so for this reason, nothing happened. But this is just an idea to, I want to give you about how, if we really want to implement the strategy and we don't want to, keep it a little bit on the paper, we have to start to think a little bit outside the box. And this kind of tools, this kind of processes have to be analyzed, especially at municipal level, in big cities, Munich, with the instance. I mean, there are lots of stakeholders and problems there. There are many regulatory problems at stake. We don't have the time to go into the details of this kind of service if you want to do that. And you may ask, why Daniel is showing us this slide with regulatory problems? Well, because now we have regulation in Italy. Until 2014, as I told you, has never been regulated. But what happened was, as I told you before, in March, the Antitrust Authority published the investigation of district heating, and Antitrust concluded that, with no prize because I wanted to say it, concluded that there was not a big need for regulation. I mean, at the beginning, this investigation started very strong, and then it didn't really give a big push to this. There was some indication, but not really strong. It looked like district heating was not such a bad guy, like somebody was saying. But there was sort of a fight between institutions because the regulatory authority for energy, with a decree in Italy, was given the power on the regulation of district heating. And in this moment, in Italy, the district heating systems are regulated, and the energy authority is just starting with what? With data collection. So in these very weeks, the energy authority in Italy is analyzing the data that they're being collected to understand the prices and the components of prices for each from operators. So hopefully in the next months we will have some results about this one. A little bit of these things will be in a book that will be published this year, and there will be a chapter about district heating. I hope you will enjoy it. And then why Lithuania? Well, first because it's a member of our consortium, so it was not chosen completely at random. And secondly, because we wanted to create a sort of comparison. I mean, Italy is a baby, you can see there. Lithuania is a grown-up man that, 60% against 4% was going on. It's a lot smaller country, but with a huge amount of district heating. Why it's like this? Well, for historical reason, you know that the former Soviet bloc had this technology going on for a long time for many reasons. It was very cheap. It was connected to natural gas coming from Russia or to very large availability of coal, for instance, like in Poland. But what I want to say is that something's going on in Lithuania that there might be something to learn even in other countries like in Italy. First of all, it's quite interesting because there is a clear natural gas substitution trend with solid biomass in the district heating sector in Lithuania. Of course, the country is different, the dimensions are different, but the trend is interesting. Then there is a biomass exchange. Yes, you got it right, biomass exchange. Not an exchange that for natural gas or electricity, but for biomass. And the third thing will be a data collection and retail heat price transparency, which is not really the same things as price circulation, but it's a good step forward to be transparent with prices. When I speak about the transition between natural gas and biomass in Lithuania, I refer to this graph. Basically, you see the structure of primary fuel for district heating production from 1997 to 2014. Basically, the only bar that you have to see are the blue ones and the green ones. If you look at 2014, where the arrows is, for the first time, the biomass and municipal waste, which is really actually a tiny fraction, let's speak about biomass, solid biomass, is more than natural gas. So we've had, it went over the natural gas. I think this is a nice sign. And the trend is quite interesting. Of course, the reason behind this is a national policy. They want to detach a little bit from the history of depending too much natural gas coming from Russia. So there are historical reasons behind it. But the effect is quite relevant. This is just an explanation of the slide before. As you can see, when I said biomass and municipal waste, basically I mean wood and wood waste, because the municipal waste is only a tiny percentage. For the point of view of the service in Lithuania and the satisfaction of users, we can see that people who cannot really pay the heat being billed in time are represented by the line of indebted consumers. And even if with a totally different situation than other countries, because every country is specific, we see that this line is quite horizontal. And maybe there are many factors, but maybe one of these is the idea that there is a little bit of attention to prices of heat in Lithuania. What do I mean by that? There's a National Commission for Energy Control and Prices that basically performs an ex post regulation, I would say not really regulation, but let's say ex post monitoring of prices and components of final users' prices. As you can see, these data are Eurocent per kilowatt hour. Every single line, I'm very sorry for the quality, I know you cannot see it, I'm not asking anybody to read those numbers. I will just tell you, every single histogram is a network, is a system, distributing system. And the colored bar, are basically the gray one, the depreciation, then you have the maintenance, the wages in blue, you have the fuel in light gray, you have the fuel purchased or the purchased heat in red, and then you have the profit in the orange and the VAT at the end. It's quite an interesting graph because for every single system, in Lithuania they manage to split every single component. Why they do that? First of all, to monitor the prices, and I think it's the most important reason. If you multiply those numbers by 10, you see that the final prices for users is something that goes from 48 to 93 euros per megawatt hour. So these are numbers that are okay. We see them in Europe. It's nothing to be surprised about. But the added value here is to understand every single component of the final price. Those of you who are economists may argue, what's the point? Because If you look at the components, you will see that in some cases the labor cost is very high with respect to others. The profits in particular are very different from each other. But remember, this is not a regulation like we would mean in other network industries. This is just a monitoring of prices that are calculated with a sort of performed with a methodology, which is an echelon methodology, that wants to be careful that 1 year after the other, the prices don't explode. So there's no interest in making the price for district heating all the same throughout Lithuania. Different time, different cities can have different prices. What is important is a single household doesn't see the price of the service skyrocket from 1 year to the other, like in northern countries, but we'll see it a little bit later. Last hint is, and then I have to finish, is the biomass exchange, as I told you. I think it's very interesting what's going on in Lithuania. Basically, is performed like an exchange of natural gas and electricity, but specifically related to biomass. In 2012, operations started with short-term contracts, and then in 2013 they started also to trade, prices and volumes for organizing long-term supplies. And these things worked. Again, this slide is not perfect. I'm sorry because the source was not high quality. But the most important thing is that after the implementation of the exchange, the biomass prices fell by 20–40%, 20–47%. And this has got an impact in the numbers of the biomass district heating system. The second effect, which is not trivial, is that the maximum price difference between the districts of Lithuania fell, the maximum price difference was around 14%. Before the implementation of the exchange, it was 25%. This is not a trivial result, because sort of harmonizes the prices, and it makes biomass a little bit more similar to a commodity. So it's quite interesting. I think that I should shut up now. I hope I didn't take too much time, and I invite my colleague Andrej to take the floor. Thank you.
It's a completely different story. Dani already introduced Central Europe, traditional economy, organized economy, and organized district heating based in Poland on coal. So district heating plays a big role, 50–60% in towns. Alternatives, we'll talk later, it's coal or natural gas produced individually. Networks are supplied in big cities from CHP plants, coal-fired, but in a big number of medium and small ones from HOD, heat-only boiler, coal plants. Renewable electricity and cogeneration and other assets, the system of tradable certificates, tell you later how this collapse of the system we've seen over the years. And of course, district heating networks, a big part of them, traditional, require rehabilitation. In general, fuel mix in heat supply, coal is the biggest factor. And use coal, so really like 100 years ago, still used like this. Heat from district heating, about 24%, but mind you that heat will see like soon 80% is from coal, so really share of coal is huge. And also the characteristic here that solid fuels, coal and biomass, use fuels, if burned badly, they cause emission. Maybe you've heard recently Krakow banned completely over a few years use both coal and biomass in individual stoves and boilers because they are of low quality. Coming to district heating, some history. Well, sorry.
Some other people say that we may drastically change the way we think about energy. There was an argument made by the president of the TSO in England, in the UK, who said that maybe in the future what's going to happen is that the large part of the electricity production will be made by renewables, and the thermoelectric power station will just be in charge of the peaks. And so our total, the way we studied energy system will completely be dedicated. So maybe, I know that you like this kind of thing, so maybe this is the case. I don't think we have the elements now to discuss such a thing, but maybe we will see something coming on. I mean, utilities are very huge debts. After the crisis, all the utilities in Europe, Germany, the first one, had huge problems. We saw negative prices. I mean, RWE at very tough moments. So something will happen. But in this moment, maybe it's a little bit early to say such a thing. If there are no more questions, I will start with the round table. I would invite here with me Beatrix, David Connolly from Heidelberg University, and Michael Geiser, and of course Ingo Wagner from European Power. Ingo has been nice enough to substitute Paul Ross, who could be with us all morning. So we'll start a little bit the discussion. I just reminded Lars. And so, first question. Let's try to have a discussion together. We have more or less 40 minutes, 45 minutes, something like this. So I would want to ask you a comment on the presentations. Not if you were good or not, because otherwise I would get very sad if you said that it was not good. But what did you take out of them? There were many different approaches. There was a problem of price, the problem of regulation, the problem of development, the lock-in about the technology, the policy mix. There were quite a few elements. So I would like to all to think about it, starting from Beatrice.
Thank you very much. Actually, I learned a lot, and I was impressed what you already, in which detail you have learned, especially from your presentation, what could be a possibility for financing, because in detail it was not discussed so much on European level. I think it's very important to address the factors and the challenges we have for the infrastructure, actually to finance. And speaking for the local and public sector, we sometimes have problems actually with all the administrative barriers, with funding partners, and so it's very interesting to see what possibilities there. Personally, I was very much, I'm interested in what Kaya was presenting, because we are speaking a lot about the system approach, that we should have a coherent approach, and what you said about the customer divide in the network, in de-socializing from the network costs, and that somebody has to pay for it. I think we see in a lot of other networks, not only in the district heating networks, we see it in the electricity network a lot, with self-consumption. So I think it's very important to compare and then come back to the best practice, which are important to discuss things and therefore in a system approach. So I learned a lot this morning, so I liked it.
Yeah, good morning. It's quite nice to see that 1 hour after they finally published the strategy and 5 minutes before the press conference starts, they don't delay it again. We basically listed all the problems that need to be tackled in this strategy. We talked a lot about prices, which is a very delicate matter, of course. Your last question, for example, was whether there should be a European transparency scheme for prices. Could. But it's very difficult because there's no way to compare these prices, and this must be clear to everyone, of course. But if we look at the strategy and also the presentations, we see a lot about the big picture, the generation, the transmission, and so on. And we see a lot about consumers. You already said there's call it a solidarity issue, there's a price issue. But what we miss also in the strategy a bit, it's in there, but it's not written in words, is the link between the buildings then and the grids. Because this is in the end what determines how successful district heating and cooling can be. You already mentioned it with the geothermal. If we look into the link into the building codes, then we see that there are a lot of issues, and I would have loved to discuss with a colleague from Denmark who seems to be gone now. But well, we need to think about technical questions like primary energy factors, concepts like on-site and nearby, and all these, well, odd and hidden discussions that bring the two together in the end.
Hello everyone, my name is David Connolly. I come from Aalborg University in Denmark, although not Danish, and I coordinate the Heat Roadmap Europe project. And I think what I learned from all the presentations this morning is that we have a very embarrassing problem. And the embarrassing problem is that not one of the presentations said we don't have a technology that can solve our problems. We don't know how to solve it. We don't know what the technology can do. What we have is a probably 100-year-old technology that we know what it can do, we know how to use it, we know how to install it, but we don't know how to organize ourselves around it. And that's a bit embarrassing. Because if you have to tell someone in 50 years, why did we not save all this CO2? Why did we not save all this energy? Well, we simply didn't know how to organize ourselves. And that's a lot more embarrassing than we didn't have a solution. So we have a solution, and we just don't know a very effective way to organize it. And I think what I learned from the presentation this morning is that there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's different countries, there's different mechanisms, there's different, let's say, carrots and sticks you can use. And what I would like to see is that we stop talking about all the options and start simplifying how we can actually do it. Because if there is some places that have done it successfully, then we know it can be done. And let's just pick a few things that work and follow those, rather than, let's say, trying to reinvent the wheel over and over and over again. Because I think this, let's say, constant debating of the optimum policy is not really what we need. I think what we need is a few simple policies that have worked somewhere else and that we can just replicate in new places. And I think what I've learned this morning is that this challenge is a big challenge, and it's not an easy one to solve. And I think from an energy systems perspective, so from the guys who actually do the modeling, which is the people that I represent, it's very clear to me why this is so difficult. It's so difficult because it involves so many people. We have to get so many people agreeing on the same solution. And that's not an easy thing to do. You have to get the guys who build the CHP plants to agree on how they'll operate. You have to get the municipality who builds the network to agree that they will use it. You have to get the consumers who buy the heat to agree that they'll actually pay for the heat. But that, to me, is something that we should be able to overcome in a lot faster way than we have been doing so far.
Well, David, thank you. I mean, when we invited you to this talk, I knew that you wouldn't make us a little bit, dream. And this is what we need, because if we get stuck on the problems, like you said, embarrassing problem that we have the technology, so the solution is there, but somehow we don't get it, and we start to talk about high-level, super general solution, but then nothing gets done, and the strategy, the family strategy, does not get enforced. Is quite sad. And going along with the dream, I know that you've taken from all some slides. Why don't you make us dream a little bit more and put a little bit of positiveness in us, making us think, what is your idea? We'll see in the slide as well some ideas, but what is your idea of the near future, of the very near future? Okay. You can go to the stage. I would really encourage everybody that is interested in this kind of talks to go to the website of the Heat Roadmap Europe, because it's full of resources. We're speaking about models, we're speaking about videos, we're speaking about information, and it's been a lot of work done in the last 3 years. I think it's valuable.
Yes, it's a lot of work over a very long period of time, and I suppose I can go back to what Paul said earlier, and sometimes when he goes into this debate he feels drunk. And I can promise you that I'm suffering from a severe hangover for the last few years, and not because I'm Irish, but because I've been going around to a lot of different places, talking a lot about the dream of what heat can do, and I many times felt very drunk in the conversation, because what I put together here is a very short, snappy presentation about some of the evidence that we've been able to create over the last few years. And I really want to emphasize that word, evidence. Because in this debate, quite a lot of the time, people talk with feelings rather than talking with numbers. And sometimes the numbers are simply scary when you actually add them up. So I've just made like a kind of 7-point evidence plan, you could say, which we think has made a huge impact on contributing to this heating and cooling strategy that's coming out today. And I suppose I can start with conversation number one that we entered. This started way back. I remember I once had a conversation with one of the people from my homeland in Ireland, telling them that we should look into district heating. And this guy was a very prominent figure in the energy debate. He was working in the electricity sector. And I said to him, well, the Danes are using a lot of district heating, maybe we should look into that. And he said, nah, that's okay for the Danes, it snows there all the time. And I said, well, I've lived there for a few years and I haven't seen much snow. So it was a backbone reaction that the Danes use district heating because it's cold. So what we started in Heat Roadmap Europe doing was actually quantify. Is it actually too cold in Denmark and too warm in Ireland, or too cold in Denmark and too warm in Spain? And we started to compare how the heat demand varies all around Europe. And what we found was, if we look at where district heating is developed in Denmark, and we compare that to the heat demand all around the rest of Europe, what we find is that actually Southern European isn't as hot as we think it is, and Northern Europe is not as cold as we think it is. And what we found was that half of the heat demand in Europe was in areas that Denmark would have defined as economically viable for district heating development. Now just take into account that here, half of the heat demand in Europe. Right now, when we did this study the first time, around 10% was district heating. So this was like a 4 to 5 times growth in district heating if you just looked at it from a purely technical point of view. And I just brought along one of the samples to give you an idea. We have Copenhagen on the left-hand side, and we have London on the right-hand side. And this is an extract from our map. And this is the same plot area, you could say, of both cities. Copenhagen has 98% district heating. London has almost none, just a few pilot schemes. But you can tell by the amount of red in both of these maps that within the same area, if we were purely talking as technical people, London would be the place with 98% district heating, not Copenhagen. So this brings me back to the point that I made about this morning's debate. When we started this project, we felt it was a policy problem. Now we're 5 years in, I still believe it's a policy problem. It's about how to implement it, not about how to solve the technology. And I suppose that's the first key message that we want to illustrate. So that's, let's say, number one, a lot of the heat demand is in areas that are suitable for district heating development. The second thing we did was we looked into how could you supply all of these district heating systems. And we made a lot of numbers and a lot of graphs, but this is just one map to give you a sense of the scale. What you see here are NUTS 3 regions in Europe. And you can see anything that's like not white or cream is an area that has at least the same amount of heat wasted from current energy production facilities as it does need to heat all of its buildings in that area. So anywhere that is like red or orange or black has more heat being just thrown away than it would need to just heat all of its buildings. And amazingly, there's places in Europe that have more than 10 times the amount of heat wasted than they need to heat all of their buildings. So right now there's a strategy being launched to try and figure out how can we get better gas supplies to heat our buildings. And what I'm telling you is that at the same time as we're doing that, we have areas where we're throwing away 10 times more heat than we need to heat our buildings, which we could simply use to replace that natural gas. And that's a phenomenal number when you think of it. That is a huge untapped resource that district heating can facilitate if we start to use it. So the two numbers that I want to highlight there are, number one, there's a lot of demand that's suitable, and number two, there's a lot of supply that we can use. The third number that we looked into was a lot of people talk about the fact that we can reduce our heat demands. And we did a lot of work about this. And what we found was, yes, you can reduce your heat demands, but the price of as you implement more heat savings. And eventually you reach a point where if you're just throwing away heat anyway, you're as well to just use that heat you're throwing away and heat your building rather than pay more and more to reduce the heat demand. And we estimated that about half of your heat demand, a maximum of half your heat demand, could be reduced. After that, it's far cheaper to just simply use this heat that we throw away. And it's only when we quantify both sides of this story that we could see where this balance would actually kind of meet each other. So that means there will be a heat demand in the future, and there will be, it's more economically viable to supply that heat with the heat we throw away rather than to continue reducing our heat demands. So that's number three. Number four, and I think this is something that Eva mentioned in her her talk earlier, and this is something we've been talking about for quite some time, especially when you look at the Danish system. And this is what makes district heating very complicated. This is a picture of how the energy system looks from a very, let's say, high-level perspective. And what we try to highlight is that thermal storage is about 100 times cheaper than electricity storage. So what we see in Denmark right now is when there's a high production of wind power, we use that wind to produce heat, which can be stored on the district heating systems. So this is a very low-cost way to actually integrate more and more wind power onto your electricity system. Now what I suppose this graph also illustrates is not just that it can accommodate wind power, but in a few presentations earlier today, I saw a lot of people talk about, let's say, the price of fuel for CHP or the price of fuel for district heating facilities. But what's happening more and more is that there's no such thing as the price of fuel for the district heating system. It's simply the price of fuel for the energy system, which is then part of both electricity and heat. They're not two separate sectors. They're simply so connected to one another that you can only analyze them by looking at the whole picture as one entity. And this is also, I think, why it's so complicated to implement district heating, because it's not just about looking at heat as one solution for one sector. It's about looking at heat as one solution for a more integrated system that not only includes CHP, but in the future will include a lot of wind and solar power also. And it's a very complicated thing to analyze, which makes it difficult to make similar suggestions. And so number 4 for us would be that there's a lot of cheap thermal storage that's available for wind and solar power integration. Number 5, this is the point I talked about earlier about how when we analyze all of these things, we have to analyze them as one system. And we do that in our work by having some energy models that are able to simulate both electricity and heat together and all these interactions between wind and solar and thermal storage. And I'm not going to go into the details of what these graphs show, but I just want to highlight one very important point. When we made a scenario for the year 2050 in what certain countries would look like, and we started to implement things like heat savings, and then we started to improve the supply side of the heat sector, we found a very interesting result. So what we have here is our business as usual where we start from. This is just for Italy as an example. So this is what Italy will look like in the year 2050 in terms of how much energy their electricity and heat sector will consume. And if we implement heat savings, which is the first step, which is reducing a lot of our demands in the buildings, we can save a lot of energy and save a lot of carbon dioxide. And that's very intuitive. However, if we then, after doing that, or at the same time as we do that, improve our efficiency of our supply side, so we stop wasting the heat and start using it, we start to supply our heat in a more efficient way using things like district heating and heat pumps, we can actually save the same amount of energy as we did when we implemented the heat savings. In other words, efficiency on the supply side is as important as efficiency on the demand side. And that's something that we're really trying to emphasize with this, and I think it is in the new heating and cooling strategy the Commission have released. But this is a new story that needs to be emphasized more and more. It's not just about reducing your demand, it's also about improving the supply side efficiency of your demand. And what we find is that we can do this while also reducing costs. And there's a lot of information about how we calculate that type of thing. But because we save so much energy, we save a lot of money on fuel. And because we save a lot of money on fuel, we actually overall save money when we implement energy efficiency. Of course, the challenge is, can we do that while implementing it in a good way? And I think that's the real challenge once again that I highlighted here. So that's 6 numbers, and the final one I'll leave you with is something that we're not 100% agreeing on with what they said in the heating and cooling strategy, and that's that cooling is more important in southern European countries. That is not what we have found. When we calculated the cooling demand, we found that it's much smaller than the heat demand, even in southern European countries. So I'll just draw your attention to the one, maybe the Italy one in the middle, and the EU one on the right-hand side. And what we've found is, like for Italy, for example, the cooling demand is about 13% of the heat demand. And in the EU, on average, the cooling demand is around 10% of the heat demand. So what you do in the heat sector, even in southern Europe, will have a far greater influence on your energy system than what you do in the cooling sector, with the footnote that cooling could expand a lot more in the future, whereas heating probably won't. So there are just some numbers you can say from the Heat Roadmap Europe stuff to try and build on the dream, and maybe someday we'll get that magic 40 to 50% to see.
Thank you, David. Absolutely, thank you so much. Again, you, Beatrice and Isaac, and you, David, to sit again. This was quite a nice break. It's interesting to know that we can do things. We can do things, and maybe, you know, we can even have a rough ideas of what to do first. The things you said about, you know, the relative importance of energy efficiency on the supply side, it's relevant. It's relevant. So, okay, so let's try to go on a little bit. And on my right, I have Isaac, he's the coordinator of Biogen, a little bit responsible for today as well since the beginning. What do you think could be our next step? You've got long experience on policy mix analysis. We've been working together for 3 years. We decided to go out today with these two topics, district heating in the morning, I guess in the afternoon. After this morning, what do you think should be done?
The policy mixes. I think what David said is very true. It is cost effective in an integrated manner. What I think what the challenge is that the cost benefit sharing should be balanced. So one is taking the profit and the other one is not. I think there is this problem in complicated value chains with multiple stakeholders. This is easier said than done. Implementation of those, like you saw my presentation, it's about how to design the financial structure for business cases, how to develop that. There's, of course, no one size fits all, but there has to be done much more work on these constructs, financial constructs. How do you combine incentives to share the burden and also share the gains of the entire system? For me, that is the implementation challenge. Then the stakeholders will follow the money and the paradigm. How many economists? So I tend to believe that story. We know it's clean, we know it's green. We're not getting the finance right. And I'm not a financial economist, but I do know that there is part of the challenge they have. And then whatever the mix may be, that's for the member states to decide. I think we need to do much more maybe research on it to explore what options do we have there, which could work, and best practices there as well. I think that is needed to bring this further.
I think it's a good agenda. So let's try to, to implement it some way. I want to go back to a little bit to what we said about, this sort of frustration in the implementation. And we've seen from my presentation, from a little bit everybody, district heating is a particular system because there are many stakeholders. And I want to ask Beatrice, what was the trick you make? When you came out with that very interesting plan, 2040, there were some lessons learned that you can share about the stakeholder consultation. I just don't want to say stakeholder consultation. I would like to call it stakeholder process. Because when you have stakeholders and every stakeholder has got a different incentives, if the incentives are not aligned, nothing happens. Because one wants to go in one direction, the other one wants to go in the other direction. Sometimes policy is not good enough to align those incentives. So if there are some lessons learned from your experience that you can share, it would be very valuable.
Thank you. I'm just thinking a bit what to say, because maybe we have a particular situation in Munich, the climate agenda of the European Union, so they are very much involved in the Covenant of Munich and all the energy cities agendas. So for us it was always a close cooperation with the city, actually, and the city as the only stakeholder in the Stadtwerke Munich local utility of Munich. So maybe it was a particular situation, but still very important that the city is behind, and everybody, all our customers actually, they are there because it's a market, they are inside the market, and they're actually supporting the strategy. We actually, it's not only a question of being the first front runners and making it green, it's actually for us also an economical issue as we compare the different possibilities to make the district heating greener. And we have lots of research done on this one, lots of figures on it. I have some slides, but I can't put them here, but if anybody is interested, we can share later. that it's really the most cost-efficient possibility for us to make district heating green. And we are always saying in Germany we are not obliged to be connected to the district heating system. It's a possibility, and we are competing in the market. So it's really always a competition to gas, to biomass, to pellets, whatever you see. So it's really a calculation we're doing. We have the fortunate situation that we only have to drill 2,500 meters down for geothermal. So maybe it's easier than other countries or locations, but it's really also economically driven. It's just to calculate where do you want to go and maybe start early. That's also a question. Where do we go? Do we take the 25, 50 targets serious? And what do we do then?
Question. Do you support energy efficiency of the tenants?
Well, Daniela said before that all local utilities are now addressing the energy efficiency and the new customer services and so on. We do also. And for sure, the 2040 calculation we are having some parts, it won't be the same demand as we have at the moment. So demand is going down, and some part of it is energy efficiency. So we don't have to have the equivalent of the current demand in renewable heating.
Thank you. Just one question about the financing. Was there any problem about the procuring of capitals? My city is
Claim of biomass, much of this could be transferred to better organized, higher efficiency, low emission district heating systems, especially if cogeneration is involved. So, of course, statistics are really they are not perfect in the case of biomass. Nothing like Lithuania, but where through this exchange and so on, there are better statistics. The statistics are very rough, I would say. Foresters, they know more or less how much they cut, but only timber, about quality wood, small diameters, fuel wood, and other residues are escaping from statistics. Of course, they are in the Eurostat, but I think numbers are rough. And biomass used for energy, it's not allowed in Poland to use quality wood, timber, round wood for energy. But so the residues and small diameters, and just a comparison, the competitor of residues which we analyzed during our project, boards, wood-based boards, play some role here. Well, the rest, I think, we've been already talking. Our presentations will be available. So, historically, price of fuels, which district heating companies are heavily or strictly regulated, so plenty of information from the regulator. Due to slowing down of economy and deflation, the natural gas prices, wood chips and fine coal are dropping the last few years, but you can see the difference, which is crucial here. That means plants of district heating cannot switch really from coal to any other fuel, because this would may result in increase of purchasing costs. And even if we put, like today, CO2, if district heating companies need to buy CO2 allowances, today they are maybe about 5–9% drop of price. Still, coal is much cheaper for them than biomass and natural gas, and only the price in Poland, over 30 euro per ton of CO2, would have any effect on purchasing price for district heating system. What to do for individual user? Low price of coal, which is subsidized this way or another. The cheapest fuel and the cheapest heat for individual user definitely is coal. District heating competes in towns with heat pump natural gas. Wood pellets, which is advanced fuel, the best biomass fuel, can compete only with light fuel oil. So end users want when it comes to the selection of heat source, typically the natural gas is winning even new settlements because networks are cheaper and natural gas companies are even more active in acquiring customers. It was mentioned before. Municipalities, they can support and they support connection of multi-family housing or public buildings to district heating networks, but the impact on individual housing is the next thing to know. Green energy, which is generated in Poland, is increasing. Probably won't get the goal for 2020, but we'll see over next years. And you can see that the biggest increase is in wind energy, but this is biomass, which is either was used for a long time in so-called coal-firing with coal power plants, CHP plants, low quality, low effectiveness. But luckily, coal-firing is not supported anymore. So its recent regulations is increasing use of CHP plants based on dedicated, as we call it, dedicated plants for biomass. The certificate system, when it was introduced in Poland, was guaranteed about import, for green electricity producer about 70 euro per megawatt hour. But because there were no, for these green certificates, there were, well, holes in the law, and there were no regulation how to cash them, and so they were kept. And now there is a speculated market, and the price of the certificates, dropped to 1/3 of what was expected, and biomass plants, CHP plants, are really struggling to survive. The same wind farms. So now we expect, so the historical income for bio CHP plants, you see over from 2011 to 2016, they have less than half of original predicted impact. We are coming hopefully to this auction system, which is delayed by the new government anyway, hopefully next second half of the year. And planned income from green electricity will be at the level of years 2011-12. Without stimulation for electricity from CHP plants, there will be no development of biomass CHP, because this is the key income for a CHP plant is green electricity. What I asked already is, of course, the system requires rehabilitation, but today state aid is limited to energy efficient district heating, and about 90% of Polish district heating companies is doubtful if they can get any money for replacement of network substations, because they are unfortunately fueled from traditional sources. Potential, we think that could be about 100 biomass CHP in Poland, taking into account resources. Today is less than 10, but unfortunately neither biomass CHP plants or boiler plants are not feasible, not economical. Nobody can push any power sector or municipality to go for this. So support to green electricity generation can assure that price of heat for end users will not be higher than present price from coal. And if I can have a word from those leaked strategy, which is at the moment published, I think that absolutely we must say from Polish experience that energy efficiency, thermal renovation is the key issue. There has been a good example in Poland, a kind of revolving fund with supplied from the state budget, 20% of grant or premium and loan, the rest private money, and could be was easily calculated that income back to the state in form of different direct taxes, indirect taxes, VAT was higher than this 20%. but for the state budget, only discounts. That means they need to spend 20%, some millions. They get more, would get more, but every year is a discussion not spending this 20%, so they are not getting 30 back, let's say. So we can, these schemes shall be absolutely supported. And we think that this support of biomass cogeneration shall really be stronger, just to ensure conversion from coal boiler to CHP plants and to connect new users. District heating must be attractive and competitive against other sources. And already was said, stability, stable situation. District heating systems require long time paying back periods. They require stability, and the same refers to CHP plants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. This is a case of technology lock-in a little bit. We're starting from, so the innovation must take place and it will take its time. We hope that the strategy will be in favor of Eastern countries. I would ask now to Kaja. This is Kaja Kala from Finland to take the floor for the last presentation. And there will be something like a couple of questions, and we will start with the roundtable. 10 minutes.
So my message is mostly about the price of district heating, because district heating is good, so it should be promoted. Why is it good? Because it's often local, it is local, it's energy efficient, it's domestic often, it's renewable often and more renewable, it can be clean, so we get less greenhouse gas emissions, we can mitigate climate change, we can get a cleaner environment, and because of these reasons in Finland it's favored and forced by law. Wherever there is a district heating network, you have to connect your new house to that, unless you build something which is carbon neutral. So also in Finland, about 25% of all energy consumption is heating of houses, and half of that goes to district heating. So about 12% of all energy consumption in Finland goes to district heating. And in Finland, 76% of all district heating plants use at least some renewable energy source. Unfortunately, the biggest plants don't use any renewable energy source. So on total, we use about 30% of district heating is renewable. And in Forssa, where I come from, there is already the biggest energy district heating company of Vapo is situated in Forssa, and it's a very big network. And they have been developing that network until recently. So now it covers many municipalities already. But what is alarming is that the price of district heating has gone up. In total of Finland, it has gone up like since 2005. It has 1.2 times higher than, like it is now 1.2 times higher than in 2005. And in Forssa, the last 10 years we have seen a 2.5 times increase in district heating price.
Maybe worth mentioning that Forssa is a city, actually?
Yes.
Okay.
So everybody doesn't know Forssa.
Okay.
Surprising. Okay, it's a small city. We are 18,000 people living in Forssa. But this district heating network is much bigger than only Forssa. Okay. So when I bought my house in 2002, one of the reasons why I wanted to buy exactly this house was that I was told that the warming will be very cheap. So it is very clean and economical and easy to use. Then now in 2015, the price has gone up 2.5 times. So then I was promised the yearly price of grid district heating is 700 euro per year, and now it is 1,700 euro per year. So I feel a little bit cheated, and I'm not the only one in Forsa. And now people are already, they are starting to rebel against this nice system. So, of course, if you are within the district heating network, you are not allowed to go back to oil. But if you already have oil heating, you are not going to change it to district heating. And those that now are in the network, they are, many people are already building geothermal heating like systems, even blocks of flats. And here is the news from September last year. The block of flat in Forsa announced that now we go to geothermal heating, and also they wanted to save some energy. So we are going to save energy by capturing energy from the district heating network, and we also build the geothermal heating. And then our company of district heating said that, okay, then we will increase your price, energy price 20%. So that sounded really unfair. But after 2 months, I don't know why it took so long for this energy company to come out and tell why they have been increasing their prices, and to promise that they won't increase their prices anymore. And why they increase prices for those people who want to save energy? It is because those people who save energy by different, like taking alternative systems, they anyway rely on the big district heating company for the very low temperatures. So it also, from their point of view, it's not fair that they have to keep up capacity for also those who don't want to pay the rest of the year. So it makes sense also. And this January it also came like visible that we really need all the capacity of that company. But why would anyone take district heating if they could choose? Oil is cheap, coal is cheap, why not heat with oil? No, it is not allowed by the law. So if you are in the district heating network, you have to use district heating. So people are in a way trapped in a natural monopoly. They can't compete, like make the heat provider compete, because the network is like tubes which are buried in the ground, so you can't change them. And then now we just heard from Helsingin Sanomat News that already 60% of new builders take geothermal heating. They don't want district heating. So all the good qualities of district heating are not coming through because of the price. And what governs the price? It is not the share of renewable energy. So here is like zero renewable energy, and here is all district heating is based on renewable energy, but the price doesn't change. It is how much you produce energy that has a little bit a small effect on price, but also that is not like linear effect. Our biggest company, Helsingin Energia, produces 6,385 gigawatt hours per year, and the price is 62 euros. And another energy company can produce 88 gigawatt hours, and their price is 47 euros. So this is also, I still don't understand what the price is based on. Maybe it's just monopoly, like to profit the share owners. Could it be? We have a monopoly also. The electricity grid is another monopoly in Finland, and now they have increased price of electricity grid. Since 2008, there is a tremendous increase in the grid, in the transfer of electricity. And this year, a big company, Caruna, has announced that they will now increase the transfer price by 30%, just like that. And that has made people really angry. And now also in the government we are talking like how to control this better so that they couldn't do this. So what to do? Should we have some system for the consumers to see what the price is based on, to make the consumers maybe a little bit happier? Could the profit be controlled somehow? Or are we consumers the only ones who have to worry about climate change? And everything to prevent climate change goes away from my pocket. So could there be a European-wide system to make the district heating prices transparent? Thank you.
Thank you, Kaya. I think we have time for a couple of questions. If anybody wants to ask something to us about this presentation, please go ahead.
Mr. Engel from Thermoflex. I have a question about Italy. We see that subsidies have more or less ceased. There's absolutely no subsidy anymore for district heating. Is there a trend or an idea that after the European Union has established the energy union and the heating cooling strategy, that the national government in Italy will restart or rethink the subsidy schemes? Same question to Poland, by the way.
Well, actually, there is something in place, like I said. I mean, the big ones maybe are over, but there are some, social incentives. I spoke about upgrades, tax reductions, and things like this. If we want to look at big numbers, probably we should wait for some decrees that will come after some laws that will come after the change in the directives that we're expecting from the European Commission. In this moment, as I said, utilities are really waiting. They are not really moving to build large heating systems. In some cases they do when they find the numbers, but if you speak with operators, you speak really about numbers, there's now a big willing to engage in large projects. This is the situation. We hope that something can change. I don't have a clear idea of what can be, maybe we can talk about this in the roundtable, or what can be the best incentive. Because like the Polish case, you request for incentives for electricity in the CHMP. We went that way, and some distortions came out anyway. Maybe in the roundtable with our friends David, we can talk a little bit about these things, but it's tricky.
Well, okay, directly it's not subsidized, coal is subsidized, even indirectly. The price of coal at international markets is going down, so they must subsidize Polish coal to have employment. But district heating is really struggling against lowering prices of gas, oil, and so on. And on the really investment part, it requires some subsidizing, because without this, long-term investments in grid are very expensive.
That is exactly what is missing.
More questions?
Marco Simonetti from Polytechnic University of Turin. Well, I heard about a stable framework twice or more time, and I wonder if the interventions on energy efficiency is in some way harmonized with the stable framework we have to mention. I mean, have you ever thought about imposing a limit to energy efficiency? Because I think that the economical the business plan would change if energy efficiency is really successful. I don't know to whom. Maybe you can answer.
Well, we've known each other for many years, and I knew that you would have asked very difficult questions. This is, of course, something very provocative. The day the strategy goes out, you want to make a cap to energy efficiency. I don't think nothing like that is going to happen, but of course, energy efficiency is contrarian to some incentives policies and to some, business models. So certainly something will have to be changed a little bit. I believe that energy efficiency has to go on, meaning that we have to, repair the holes of our bucket before going on with everything, like Eva said this morning. But it would require a little bit of a paradigm shift, and maybe some utilities are starting to understand this. There are many things going on. Somebody speaks about